points that these minority groups have that we're debating about in this debate. Notice that call-out culture is not necessary to show you that you don't agree with the person who makes derogatory comments, nor to divert attention to these things. Why? Briefly about definitions and then moving on to my constructive material. Notice that this debate takes mostly in context with the internet and social media, also on media platforms, because there these issues get the most attention. What we mean by outrage and call-out culture is condemning individuals or groups for their behavior in an outraging and shaming manner. How it looks like, how it doesn't look like, for example, is stepping in when somebody is being assaulted on a bus for wearing a hijab, or it doesn't look like when you're writing an article about an issue of somebody making blackface without expressing outrage or shaming a group. It's also not like sending a private message and showing somebody that you don't agree with it. How it looks like is actually that you're condemning individuals and labeling them racist or sexist, for example, and showing that and just like sharing publicly that their actions are basically disgusting and shameful and basically like creating outrage around that issue. We believe that all of these problems that these people do can be solved very well with like approving or saying that you don't agree with them privately either, or in a constructively criticizing manner in, for example, an article or a TV show. It leads to, call-out culture leads to firstly polarization and support of harmful and derogatory ideologies, and secondly, it diverts attention away from the actually important groups and solving their issues in the world. But I'm moving on to my first argument now about how it leads to polarization and derogatory ideologies. How call-out culture works is that the average individual or comic show or person making comments that are insensitive is being called out by some progressive groups. No, thank you. By some progressive groups and showing why their behavior is not okay. Basically, how it looks like is that these progressive groups or people or progressive individuals with their ideology often shows or reacts to basically everything. Somebody making a racist comment or making an insensitive comment. What this leads to is two things. Firstly, that person who makes that comment and is being called out will likely feel attacked, and secondly, on a societal level, people are going to be polarized and feel like their beliefs are being attacked. Firstly, on the individual level, polarization happens because average people don't simply very often understand why it's, for example, not okay to make a blackface on their daughter when they're going to a prom and, for example, want to dress up as Beyonce. The average person might not understand and post pictures on the social media, and if they're being called out for that, then they have a very strong confirmation bias to not agree with persons who have expressed outrage and who have shamed their daughter for it. So the polarization happens in the individual level, that you're likely to not agree with a person who is shamefully calling you out, and hence you're much more likely to identify yourself with being called a racist or being called sexist. So firstly, you're more likely to feel that, well, racism is okay in some instances because you're called a racist and you think that, okay, well, I agree with this part of racism. Or that you're likely to oppose these progressive values because you have been personally attacked by those individuals claiming that, look, for example, the Black Lives Matter movement doesn't agree with you dressing up your daughter as Beyonce. So on a personal level, some average people are much more likely to now feel inclined to alt-right ideologies, for example, or the ones that they are being labeled to. But also on a societal level, polarization is going to happen. And before I explain that,
calling out someone as racist and sexist you need to give some certain context for it. Why is that constructive context mutually exclusive?
Well, obviously in social media, how it actually looks like is that you share, for example, the Twitter harmful sexist comment and you show, look, this is disgusting and this is sexist. This is how it looks like, and this gives the platform to these people making these comments. I'm going to explain that later, or right now actually. So how is it on societal level polarizing and harmful? You always have backlash to people calling you out, because the outrage when you call out culture is usually very strong. The info slide shows that this involves some sort of shaming and some sort of outrage. So that the backlash to the call out culture is also very likely to be mutually also very emotional and very angry. So that these racist and neo-Nazi people who have been, for example, called out, or the average person who have been called out, is not going to gain platform with their comment, because because more people are going to see it if you call it out, if you share the post, or even if you describe a post or describe an instance that has happened to you. So why does it reach more people? Why does it gain more platform? Two reasons. Firstly, it reaches the feed of more people simply because it's being shared or described. Secondly, it catches the attention more of people because it seems more important. These angry messages or very strong kind of language that is usually used when people are angry and describing something in a strong manner is likely to catch more attention simply due to its nature. So these ideas will now be caught more attention of people, and people will actually see that these things exist. Why it's harmful? Because people will now think that this is much more everywhere than they before thought. These are usually the derogatory beliefs of few individuals, but now it's going to seem like there's much more of it. So because everybody's supporting it and there's a discussion over it. So since you see it, you're more likely to feel that it's normal that some people feel like that around you. And furthermore, many people are likely to always support your actions. There are always racist people who are going to stand up and say, look, blackface is okay, or that you should act like that towards a migrant. So that there will be polarization of racist people supporting these derogatory ideologies, and some progressive people saying that this is not okay, and also insulting other people on the internet. Hence, it creates polarization and very negative feelings. So on the societal level, this is harmful because it reaches the feed of more people and it catches the attention, and hence, more average people are likely to feel that this is normal, and hence, feel that look, I'm being attacked by progressive values. So they're less likely to vote for progressive politicians, and they're less likely to, for example, stand up for people who are being abused because they feel like this is normal, and many people believe that way. So why these problems are not dealt with is because when people react to everything and are basically feminists stand up for people dressing up as Beyonce, or pencils being blue and pink for boys and girls separately, then this diverts away the attention from actually important issues. Because these groups, for example, the feminist groups, actually stands for very important issues. For example, gender pay gap or sexual assaultion. If they're going to call out some supermarkets putting pink colored pens for girls and blue colored pens for boys, and this is going to divert the attention away from the real issues, and rather make the average people see, look, this is what they actually stand for, and hence they're less inclined to actually believe that there is an issue. Or if they call out that same girl who went to the prom dressed up as Beyonce, they're much less likely to believe that there actually is an issue with black, Americans, for example, suffering under black brutality. So that this diverts the attention away from the real problems, and hence, the popular support is much less to actually solving these things. For all of these reasons, this leads to polarization, and this diverts the attention away from important issues. I beg you to propose.
Thank you. I would like to invite the speaker of the applications and deliberators.
I think it's important for us to understand what call-out culture really looks like, because they paint it as people talking about insignificant issues that don't really affect people, issues that people want to make a big deal about. But what does call-out culture actually looks like? It looks like people not only talking about big, big highlighted incidents like police brutality, but also on subtle instances that don't always violate the law, but violate human dignity nonetheless. This looks like when students call police on African American students because they believe they're trespassers in their college dorms. This looks like Ohio senators kicking out pro-choice protesters at their press briefing. See, none of these actions are strictly illegal. None of these actions are strictly are by objective terms as big as say police brutality, but they have the same repercussions nonetheless. An infringement of human dignity. What does this calling out look like? This calling out looks like making Facebook posts that share their own story and their own opinion alongside with that hateful comment. So it's not just that hateful comment existing in isolation within that post. Your own story is mixed within it. You also share certain videographic evidence of whether that event has happened place. What does this do? This highlights and magnifies subtle instances that aren't illegal. For example, microaggressions and expressions of inherent discriminations in society that are easy to ignore for the general populace as isolated incidents or incidents that simply do not matter. But what they do is they indicate that these smaller incidents are indicative of a larger trend. For example, when these police call on African American students for trespassing, when they call on on black people in Starbucks just sitting innocently for vandalizing, this creates a trend an underlying trend that racism isn't solved, that black racism is still quite prevalent in culture today. Three burdens in our case meant that. First, why it's an effective tool for self-defense for these minorities. Second, how it creates awareness and recognition of the kinds of microaggressions that we want to talk about in this debate. And finally, how it deters future harm. Before that, a few pieces of rebuttal. So their first argumentation lies on the fact that people don't understand what's wrong and people have a strong confirmation bias. My question is, there is no justification on that side as to why ignorance deserves protection. Imagine this, if someone didn't know theft was illegal, would you not punish that person? Clearly you would, because those laws still exist. Some things are just objectively wrong, and regardless of whether that person understands it or not, that person deserves to be punished and called out for it. Secondly, their idea that, when these people share these posts, they see these posts everywhere of hateful comments everywhere, and they think that is everywhere. Well, they don't understand that these hateful comments aren't in isolation. They also see people that sympathize with the victim along with those posts, and see how they're numerous in number. Under their world, these victims feel like they're in isolation, that there is no one else out there to protect them. But finally, about how it diverts attention away from the big issues. No, it strikes a balance, because all mass media would want you to believe is happening is incidents like police brutality, incidents like a pay gap, overriding issues that are very clear to see. What they'll miss out on are subtle issues that are difficult to identify, that call-out culture effectively identifies under our world. Before I move on to my positive matter, sure.
Under our world, we can still talk about these problems and how they are systemic. Why do we need to talk about the specific individuals who are
because unless you attach a human face to that particular incident, that incident seems like an isolated event. An isolated event that you cannot relate with, an isolated event that you feel like is an anomaly within the status quo. The moment you attach emotional value and a human face to that incident is the moment in time you reconcile with the fact that this is important. First piece of positive matter. Why it's a form of self-defense for these minorities. Because these crimes, these microaggressions are often carried out by people in positions of power that render that individual powerless. But we think that social media that they'd like to talk about is the greatest power equalizer in this house. How does this happen? This means that the local sheriff, if he wants to shut you up about that particular microaggression that the court took against you, the police took against you, then there are 5 million shares on your post that expose that wrongdoing, that make sure that wrongdoing isn't ignored, isn't hidden, that sheriff cannot simply cover up that news. Secondly, it also gives you a form of solace, because we've told you already that when victims suffer these microaggressions, because of how mass media portrays only big issues to be of significance, they often feel alone. They often feel like they're in the wrong for this. They often feel like there are bigger issues and this isn't something important. The moment they can use call-out culture to talk about their own experiences and see that there are millions of people online that are willing to share their viewpoints, talk about their viewpoints, sympathize with their viewpoints, is the moment they feel a sense of solace, that they're not alone in this world, that they're not alone against these power structures that render them helpless. We think that's very important. But finally, the chain reaction that happens. Oftentimes, the reason these small incidents aren't highlighted is because every single person going through this small incident thinks that it's a small incident. This means hundreds of people across the country represses their own incidents and says that it does not matter. In a moment in which we have call-out culture is the moment every single person of that hundreds of people start telling their stories online. That incentivizes hundreds more people to tell their stories online. This creates an aggregating effect in which more and more people come out with their stories of how these microaggressions affect them, about how these crimes have affected them, making this small issue bigger and highlights the inherent problems in society. But it also creates a sense of solidarity with those people that you now consider your friends because they've gone through the same traumatic incidents, they've gone through the same shared experiences. The importance of this argument is self-defense for these minorities. The capacity for self-defense is often limited, but we expand that by giving them an opportunity to to speak out against the power structures that harm them, by giving them an opportunity to gain some form of solace in the face of these microaggressions. We think that's extremely important. Second argument as to how this creates awareness and recognition, because people don't often recognize the subtle harms that these microaggressions cause. Why is this so? Because a lot of this is non-visible. Imagine this: you're driving down a road, right? And on the side of the road, you see a police officer has stopped a black man. You as an individual who is unaware of these microaggressions will see this and see like that is a normal conversation. What you will not understand is that that is a microaggression in process, that is an entrenchment of human dignity in the process. Because people love to live in denial, because the reality that they live in is far too bitter for them to accept. Especially for these people, they live in the power structure, they believe that they're immune to the same form of racism that the big news or the mass media likes to highlight, and they don't want to come to terms with their privilege. How does this change under our world? Because under our world, you get constant reminders that these things are happening, and your agency and your people are committing them. But also, you sense the magnitude of these events, that these are not isolated events, but these are events that happen all across the place. And people in privilege gain irrefutable evidence that they are within that privileged stance, and they need to come to terms with it. We think that's especially important for these people within the power structures to recognize that. But finally, deterrence. We think that people, as we already stated, love to live in denial. And people in power structures exploit that love for denial to commit all the crimes that they want, because they know that the people won't speak out against them. The only reason this call-out culture helps is because even if your boss won't fire you if you're racist, your boss will fire you if there are public repercussions against your racism. Those public repercussions only come at the point in which people call you out for that and people start talking about that. At the point in which these power structures are pressured to remove these inherent discriminations from within their organizations is the point in time we think that this creates a deterrence from these events happening in the future. Ladies and gentlemen, under our law, we protect these minorities by giving them a tool of self-defense, by making sure that people are aware and cognizant of the power structures that they are part of, but also by preventing future harm by creating this deterrence. We are very proud to oppose.
Team proposition doesn't need to protect absolute silence. We are fine with these minorities speaking out. We simply tell you that no face, no name, no agency, no corporation, no supermarket, no whatever should be in correlation with the claims that you are making. You shouldn't be saying that some people are doing bad things too, because this inherently creates polarization. It creates a situation where someone needs to defend themselves, and in order to do that, they need to create support for themselves that's going to be harmful for those minorities. We see that doing these things by not creating harm to someone else explicitly, these minorities are going to be more effective in achieving the cause of equality that they are fighting for. In this speech, firstly making rebuttal to the case that we hear from Team Bangladesh, then moving on to points rebuilding our case, and finally telling you how we increase the perception of the harm that is being done to those people, and thus they themselves feel like more harm is being done, and we decrease their life quality. Starting with rebuttal. Their first speaker comes up and tells us that callout culture deals with things that are not outright violation of human rights, but more subtle things. We agree with this characterization. We agree with the fact that people are talking about more subtle things when call-out culture exists. You need to call out every meme that is posted about you that's offensive for you. You need to call out every joke that is made about you on social media. This is exactly the problem that we see. I think that it creates a radical perception of these minorities, meaning that they can't take a joke, for example. These are things that inherently harm those groups in the end, and will not give them the political capital necessary to fight for the causes that they have. That's the characterization that Team Bangladesh needs to talk about in this debate. They tell us that you need to speak of your own story and that you can't do this otherwise. I think that this is something that we can have under our side as well. You can still talk about the fact that you were harmed at Starbucks, but you don't need to say the name of the police officer, for example, or you don't need to talk about those things. You still can talk about incidents that are happening to you to show the extent of what the amount of racism or discrimination that exists in our society. You don't need to say that someone is a racist or someone is a horrible person, because that's the instance where we create massive amounts of polarization and arguments in our societies which are ineffective in providing equality for those groups. But notice that they also need to protect a full characterization. They need to prove to you, well, you should always answer to all of the jokes that are made about you in the case where you are a black person living in the United States, for example, or in the instance where you are a gay person. But you need to answer to all of those jokes and why that helps you in achieving equality and how that is going to be beneficial for you. Secondly, they tell us that you need awareness and that you need to have, you can only overcome these things when many people are talking about something, and only then you can really show the true extent. I think that Me Too, for example, can't really be characterized as an inherent call-out culture. People who are talking about things that had happened to them, but aren't saying that this one person is a horrible person because of the things that they did to me. They say Me Too, which is possibly the smallest thing that they could do, but still show the extent and receive massive benefit to the community because of that. They could show the extent without saying that someone is a horrible person and that someone should be inherently harmed for the rest of their life because of doing something. I think that these are the things that they are protecting under call-out culture, and this is the comparative that we give to people who can still show the extent, but don't need to harm, don't need to accuse someone inherently or say that this is all of their fault. Not yet. Finally, about awareness and recognition. We tell you that you can still say that I was harassed on the bus today. These are things and culture mechanisms that these people still own. But notice that it's better if it's not driven against one individual in specific. It is more likely that change will happen in instances where you are not seen as a hugely radical person. If you say that I think that all of these white men are horrible people, then none of these white men are going to support you. In the instance where many women say that I was harassed on the bus today, then some of those white men will support those women because they are not attacking those white men, but simply talking about a problem that those white men can see that what could be fixed without them inherently being harmed. They are not attacking a certain group that could help them, but simply talking about the problems and making them more talked about. Before moving on to rebuild, one people.
So the entire context-based status will be invalidated under your work because the last line said that that guy was racist.
You are accusing someone of doing something, and we think that that is counterproductive to the cause that you have. You're strictly accusing one person that forces that person to defend themselves and thus attack the cause that you have. They want to illegitimize the arguments that you are using, that you can create less support for yourself as a member of the black community, for example, and other people might see you as having illegitimate points. Moving on to the point about polarization. They only give one answer to this and say that some things are objectively wrong. Notice that this might be true, but some of these things might not be the most important things for those groups. It might be wrong that we have pink and blue pens for girls and boys respectively, but But that's not the main point of feminism, to fight for those pens all being yellow. They want to fight against pay gap, for example, or the fact that women are being domestically abused. These are the most important things for them, but in the instance where someone makes jokes about them being special snowflakes and only caring about those pens, in call-out culture they need to respond to all of those things. They are diverting attention away and making themselves seem as very radical, meaning that this society becomes more polarized because no one feels like they can agree with those feminists because they are so radical. And then polarization is very important in this debate because in the instance where no one supports these ideas, these groups never can actually achieve things they most truly care about and that are going to bear the most positive impacts for them. And secondly, we told you how they are less capable of achieving their agenda. The only thing up here is that they miss out on subtle issues, and I already told you how that's true, and these aren't the most important things for them. In the instance where they only care about those subtle issues, or make them, or create the possibility for some other people to perceive those subtle things as the most important things for those groups, they are perceiving themselves as more radical, which also means that many feminists, for example, go away from the feminist movement because they say that decreasing the pay gap is more important than tampon tax, for example, and the feminist movement as a whole loses out, and their agenda becomes more narrow and less clarified for all of the members of that group. This means that these groups in itself are inherently harmed because of the fact that they react to every small thing instead of focusing on the bigger issues at hand. Therefore, we think that the case that we get from Team Bangladesh isn't actually proving their point and isn't saying why we should respond to every little thing. We think we've been successful in showing to you that we should focus on the bigger issues that these communities face. Moving on to my extension now. How are we going to increase the harm then? Our first speaker already told you how under the call-out culture, these people are going to reach more ground. So the call-out culture forces you to showcase something as much as possible. You need to explicitly say why or how something has been done, who did it, and what do you think of that person now. This means to reach huge amounts of people about one case, for example. BuzzFeed released an article about a girl going to prom in a traditional Chinese gown, which got millions of readers, and all of those people were bashing that one girl and saying how they were the most horrible person ever. I think that this harm might be legitimate to some extent, as like her probably was doing cultural appropriation, but we think that this harm is also disproportionate for two reasons. Firstly, these people who are harmed by these articles would not have known about these harms in the first place. They wouldn't have known about the fact that this girl went to prom using a Chinese gown. Now they are harmed by the knowledge of that thing, and they wouldn't have been under the side where call-out culture doesn't exist. We don't make such huge cases about someone doing something wrong that they probably didn't even mean. But furthermore, I think that this is how harm that will always remain, even if call-out culture exists. Those people legitimately believe that what they said was right, or that we don't actually understand why what they did was wrong. They would not change their behavior because they don't see those things as a problem that they are doing, so they would never change the way that they behave, or never would apologize for the things that they did, because they don't think that there was a mistake in their behavior. But furthermore, in an instance where you're personally attacked in cold word, you're more likely to be defensive and not allow for some kind of leverage, or you're saying that you might have been wrong to some extent. I think the level of impact would have been lower if the call-out culture wasn't so huge, because there would be more argumentative and explained discussion rather than simply bashing someone and perpetuating the harms that exist under the status quo. For these reasons, we think that call-out culture is too much, and those groups would be better off without it proposed. Thank you.
They lose this debate when they shirk away from their burden. They tell you that call-out culture only focuses on certain mild and trivial forms of oppression like meme wars or talking about the color of your pen and all of that. That never addresses the huge number of issues that call-out culture brings into focus. The fact that it brings into focus police brutality against even children that come from certain black minorities. That it brings into focus certain, the ways in which even in university campuses, certain people from certain racial and ethnic minorities get assaulted. If their case is only about how certain trivial issues need not be focused on, I don't see why that's an exclusive problem with only call-out culture. I don't see why that's an issue with the general trend of people who focuses on certain trivial issues and not why that's only about call-out culture. Secondly, we need to understand that call-out culture does not only insult the race or ethnicity that these oppressors come from. The people who endorse call-out culture are often liberal people who are often people who genuinely believe in equality. I don't see why they will suddenly become racist to the point that they will start denouncing the race or the ethnicity that these assailants come from. I think in the vast majority of cases they denounce the action in and of itself, why that is horrible, why that is shameful, and why that's horrible. You need to tackle all these two instances in which A, they address very important issues that need to be addressed, and B, they need to address how certain actions need to be denounced on a mass scale. You need to understand the distinction between the forms of discourse that happens in this debate. First, the outreach that you get, because in the vast majority of cases, if you do not have a visual image attached to the discussion, if you do not show why this particular action is so hateful, is so shameful, then most people will not understand the magnitude of how horrible that crime is. It's especially important because many people cannot relate with these minorities, cannot relate with the sorts of assaults that they face on a day-to-day basis, cannot relate to the oppression. And if you do not have a face attached to that oppression, if you do not have a face attached to that discussion, if it's only about statistics about how this particular person faced this, then in the vast majority of cases, the outreach is lessened. But second, it raises a feeling of necessity to respond and help. Have thousands of people gathered in opposition to the Boston Free Speech rally because people realize how these people who are supporters of right-wing populists have assaulted on their own black minorities. That's how people who didn't even come from these black minorities necessarily adopted that movement. First of all, they told you that you can talk to these people privately. I don't see how that happens because many of these oppressors are just immune to these minorities conversations because they have a geographical barrier with these people, so they often can't relate. People in Washington probably cannot relate to all those black minorities that live in ghettos in Texas or etc. But secondly, you are hateful towards these certain ethnicities already, so I don't see how your opinions change every single time these minorities talk to you privately. It needs to happen on a wide scale where people from your own community also denounce your activity. But secondly, it's very unlikely that people from your own community will also denounce your activity because they often share the same racist or sexist views as you have because people often come from the same echo chamber. So I don't see how private conversations happen, or even if it does, how does that change? Then they tell you that it diverts attention from constructive discourses, never attacking our Elo's case. How discourse follows from that call-out culture. First, people from their victims' community or liberal people also share their own thoughts about why this particular action, why this assault is a signal about a wider, a bigger problem in the society. How that brings into focus a huge number of issues that would have otherwise never been focused upon. Secondly, these people who come from their own communities discuss why the community does not stand for these crimes. While even for if a white person say oppresses or assaults on a black minority, many people from within those white communities also come up and say why they don't endorse this. These are the ways in which people try and understand the distinction between what that ethnicity stands for and what a particular person does because of his rage. These are the forms of discourse that you lose out on because no one brings them into focus. Because people rely on statistics, rely on just newspapers, which never brings that human face and that visual image attached to it. We think that is the distinction that needs to be addressed. But secondly, many of these hateful comments need to be put out there. Why? Because if you think about it, why don't people feel deterred when they pollute the environment? Because unlike other forms of actions like racist assaults, which have a derogatory comment attached to it, that every single time you do so, people call you racist. That is something that deters you. Whereas actions like polluting the environment often don't have the derogatory comment attached to it in response, which in a lot of cases deterrence is very, very minimalistic on your side. But second, many of these actions deserve that hate, deserve that shame to begin with. We think we'll give voice to the ones that are voiceless. We give voice to all those minorities that often cannot have that outreach because they don't control mass media, like Fox News is controlled by people like Rupert Murdoch. These are the ways in which those people are voiceless, and this shameful comment gives voice to all of those people. Then they tell you that these assailants should be portrayed as people who aren't even human. You portray their actions as inhuman, you portray their actions as grotesque. I don't see why that translates into portraying those humans as being grotesque. But then they tell you that, oh look, people oppose those progressive values because they feel attacked. The problem is that many of these people will not coincide with the progressive ideologies because they're already racist. They've already grown up within the echo chamber where they feel that certain minorities are just inferior inherently. So I don't know how that changes all of a sudden when you say this particular person has committed this crime, and that's terrible. If those shameful comments get taken away, I don't see how all of that changes. But before I move on, your POI.
The fact that you talk about people living in similar echo chambers and not understanding the struggles of these minorities are exactly the reasons why in the case where a certain individual is being attacked, all of these people will protect that individual because they don't understand the critical.
I don't see why that's exclusive to, on your side. If you have newspapers that, focus on these assaults, they also jump on the bandwagon and try to protect and justify those actions. The problem is that on our side of the house, because it's on a wider scale, this discussion allows more people to tackle why that justification is not right. That means this discussion happens on a much wider scale that deters people from committing these actions in the first place. First of all, call-out culture forces the vast majority of people to be cognizant about oppression that is not visible and is concealed by the state. How does it occur? The social norm is such that people don't care about certain minorities' plights because their plights are just not visible to them. When the state used torture techniques such as waterboarding upon people from Hispanic communities to extort information about drug dealers, people didn't care. Why? Because they think it is for a wider and ulterior benefit, which is people's safety. State could justify these actions by saying that we're trying to protect you. We're trying to tackle, crack down upon these minorities because they're just minorities. They're just inherently evil. That individualistic end often clouds people's empathy. In our world with call-out culture, we have visual images on both sides of the house, but when in our world, people keep sharing those clips and all those images and call out the state as absolutely heinous in doing this. That no human deserves this. That these Hispanics aren't inherently evil. This call-out culture brings shame to all of those states that forces people to go through this sort of oppressive cycles. Your shame and your expression of outrage forces state to listen to you. But most importantly, it forces people to be cognizant who would have otherwise succumbed to the state, which says that this is for your own protection, that these Hispanics are just inherently evil. The impact is that the public resistance forces state to stop these sorts of oppression. That is how waterboarding was stopped as not anymore a useful strategy in criminal justice system. For all of these reasons, because we protect the minority, because we bring important issues to the focal point, because we protect those who have no other ways to express themselves, we are very proud to propose.
both sides of the house. We think that we need to look at how the average person might identify themselves, or how the average person now, like which side is he or she now going to identify with more under our case. And under our case, we've talked about the fact that these average people who might be ignorant and are being, but not inherently racist, are now going to be pushed into that position where they are told that they are racist, which means that they have to defend themselves, and which means that it is more likely that they overall are going to be buying into that rhetoric, or have to back down, and will start to believe the overall this more conservative agenda more because they are being pushed into that. We think that when in their extension they talk about the fact that they can shame the state, that we think that this applies to us as well. We can also shame the state. This is in this motion. We think that this debate is about specific individuals, shaming specific individuals or groups with inherent identities. We think that we don't really understand why can't all of their benefits that they've been talking about in this debate come with talking about articles or making posts without shaming specific individuals. We think we can still talk about these problems in a very effective manner, and they haven't proven why this shame is so critical in understanding why the societal problems are so large. I want to talk about two things in my speech. Firstly, I want to look at how this is going to affect the perpetrators, and secondly, I want to look at how it's going to affect the victims overall. So first off, how is it going to affect perpetrators? Now, they say that these people deserve to be called out inherently, but we think that this, in reality, we're harshly labelling many people that maybe shouldn't deserve to be labelled. We don't agree that just ignorant people who might just like sexist jokes should be so disproportionately harmed, to publicly be shamed that they are sexist and disgusting people on social media where they have their friends and their family. This is something that our extension talks about. The harm is so disproportionate for these people who are only just ignorant. We think that privately they should be talked with, or just build this discussion without labelling them as horrible people, as disgusting people. The reason why these are better alternatives were explained in our first argument that aren't really rebutted to. The fact that as an individual, when you feel attacked, you're more likely to, for example, oppose more liberal values as you are being rejected from that, or that racists or sexists who support these people in that social media platform, they are going to be on their side, on the side of these average people, which means that they are inherently now in this group, which means it is more likely that they are going to buy into that overall rhetoric. And this applies to an overall more societal level, where people who have been called racist or believe that racist humour is okay can't identify themselves as liberals anymore because they are completely rejected from that overall group, which means that they are forced into that conservative ideology, and more people feel that and more people overall feel that people are overreacting, which means that we think that all of our alternatives are much better at preventing overall average people buying into the overall rhetoric of racism, sexism, and homophobia. No, thank you. But now let's look at how this is going to affect the victims, which is very important. We think they said that victims feel in isolation if there are no sympathisers for them. Well, we see that under call-out culture, the dialogue that we have is a lot harsher. We also talked about polarisation and the fact that calling someone out and calling someone a disgusting person makes for a much more heated discussion, makes for the fact that more people are going to defend that rhetoric, defend that racism, which means it's more likely that even if there are some sort of sympathisers, then minorities will come into contact with a lot more hateful rhetoric that is going to be a lot more extreme, and I think this is more harmful for these people as a whole. But the second harm they talked about was that people overall fire employees only if there are repercussions, and we're going to leave harassers at workspaces. We think that these things are probably illegal, or at least they themselves characterise that we shouldn't be talking about illegal things in this debate at least. But we think that overall, if a private letter is sent to an employer saying that someone is harassing others at your work, then probably even under us, you don't have to publicly shame that person. There will still be a fine, and we don't think this is a harm that exists under our side. But now, more importantly, they talk about the fact that call-out culture also deals with subtle problems such as calling police or a grilling party, and we need to showcase these cases a lot. But we don't understand why you need to show a specific face to actually show that this problem exists. We think that we can still have dozens of people talking about personal incidents of police brutality, and this will have the exact same effect. Obviously, if this is a systemic problem, then under our side, people are still going to be talking about this on social media. You don't need to out and publicly shame these people who might be doing this. We think that we have actually having one single individual who
Sir,
showing as a perpetrator in a post makes it seem much more of an isolated incident than you have if you have many people talk like, or if you show it as something that might be more systematic, and where you show it as not the problem of one specific individual, but a more systemic problem of a whole institution. We think you can still criticise, no thank you, systemic societal problems, and you can still talk about why it feels horrible, or why it's systemic, or why it's so negatively impactful of your life. All of these things are things that you can still talk about without showing the face of the individual who did it, or who made a racist comment. And this also means that if we don't look at every single specific example, then there is more social capital to deal with problems that are most important to a specific social group. You don't need to react to every single problem. No, thank you. For example, like talking about like girls' toys being dolls and boys' toys being cars, which might be problems, but which use a lot of social capital that could have been used for focusing on the gender pay gap, which disproportionately affects that group a lot more. And the impact of this, is that it is less that this overall social group that is being harmed is less able to gain support, and more people think of it as extreme, which means more people don't support it. And when we're talking about minority groups, then obviously it is important for public support to actually be there, for people to actually support your cause. Yes.
Are you not okay with newspaper posting photos of criminals or incidents like that?
Well, when we talk about criminals, then these are obviously people who have been convicted of something that is completely illegal. But we think that overall, if it might be in the overall public interest to know of a specific criminal, then maybe. But we think that what we're talking about is a lot more of like not specifically illegal, but just something that might be overall if you're ignorant, then you might make some sort of different comments. But even if they somehow prove that maybe these people should be outed, all of our negative harms that we've brought out about the overall average person becoming much more entrenched in this overall racist rhetoric still stands, which means the comparative in this debate is that they bring emotion into discussion and condemn some sort of individuals for maybe a more heated debate and more people being angry about things. But we think that under our side, we can still talk about these problems. But firstly, we are selective of the problems we talk about, which means that we gain more social capital and political capital for problems that might be important to us. But secondly, we don't reject people from overall believing in some sort of liberal movement, or we don't reject people who already aren't very liberal, who aren't extremely believing all sorts of minority rights, which means that overall under us, we think we can more effectively make the middleman, the average person, understand why it is so important to understand why blackface isn't okay, or why police brutality is a large problem in our society. For all of these reasons, please vote for proposition. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to invite the third speaker of the opposition to deliver their speech.
A very crucial concession that when it's convicted criminals, it is okay for society to know. But doesn't the arguments of people feeling attacked, or these individuals who will eventually come back to society, them feeling rejected or marginalized, apply there as well? We need to understand that the importance of hate in these sorts of cases is quite simple. To one, catch the eye, and second, make it relatable for people to read these sorts of statuses to begin with, something that they don't understand. Second thing I need to tell you is that the fact that most of the refutation, if you take a look at your notes, is that it's not exclusive to your world, it can happen under our world as well. The reason why this is problematic, and quite so, is because they don't understand that nuances where we give you the mechanism via which these sorts of hateful statuses eventually lead people to feel like they can defend themselves. The fact that we showed you things about awareness, why that is not a net benefit, and the fact that when this policy passes, these things wouldn't exist because people won't write these hateful comments, makes this a net negative under their world. We don't think they approach that. Three things then in my speech. First, the sort of discourse that essentially happens. Second, under which world do we help minorities? Lastly, under which world do the people committing such acts, where are they catered to? So first, on the sort of discussion. Okay, so here's an important characterization that nullifies most of their premise. If you are to call someone racist, you can't just do it out of the blue. The reason for this is quite simple. People won't understand what you're saying, and people won't share it as much. Which means, in order for you to call someone racist or sexist, you need to give a context before as to what happened, why it happened, when it happened, and why you felt that that person was racist or sexist. We think that is the constructive part of that status, Facebook status, that comes before. Under their world, just because that person had an outrage of anger, just because that person called that other person racist, and in often cases rightfully so, that entire status is invalidated. We think that is abhorrent for a victim who has just been, felt something horrible being done. Do you know what the response was to this? That guess what? We should not focus on individual small issues but on larger issues. I don't think that is a fair claim to make. Because note, I shouldn't have to hide the injustices that are being done to me right now because you feel that there are more important issues to be discussed in society. The simple reason being, it's not mutually exclusive. The fact that I share a status about why a police officer was wrongfully doing something to me doesn't negate the fact that we can't talk about other problems done for black people in society, for example. That's one. But more importantly, these incidents contribute to these constructive news media articles that you essentially speak of, because these are used as evidences, picturesque evidences for these discourses to essentially shape up. But the second part of this clash is nullifying the fact that these people, the people that commit such incidences, don't get defenses. Note that they do. Even in instances where, let's say, someone calls someone something racially very bad, even they get protected by some people in the comment section that they feel that, who feel that what they did is right. And that is the single biggest refutation to blocking out most of their argumentation regarding why these people are marginalized. They are not, because in a public forum, there are people that defends these sorts of acts, there are people that opposes these sorts of acts. What does this essentially do? Simply so, this forces these sorts of conversations to become constructive. Now, and here's the exclusivity. Why is public outrage or publicly shaming an important part of this discourse? The reason being, one, because this is when you grab attention of people, right? Because when people look at the fact that these sorts of things are made, these are something that you can automatically relate to, and more importantly, the fact that these were hateful comments increases your need to defend your stance, which essentially means that under their world, it's a long news media article that you'll probably never get into, but by the virtue of these sorts of comments being existent, you chip in, you look through the comment sections as to what people are saying. That is why these hateful comments in certain instances are quite important. So, in conclusion, the sort of discourse is a balancing one that caters to the person who committed the heinous act and the victim in and of itself. So they cannot win this debate by just claiming there's an imbalance there. But secondly, how do we help minorities? Here they had two arguments. One, the fact that you apparently make jokes out of these minorities, and that's a bad thing. Note, they make jokes out of serious texts as well. So we see jokes made out of religious text, which is evidence that if there is someone out to make jokes on Facebook, they'll make memes anyway. But second, And more importantly, they say that it takes away attention from other issues of minorities. Note that I've already refuted this by claiming why I shouldn't have be someone that needs to care about that. But more importantly, there are two major argumentations that they absolutely overlooked. One, the argument of self-defense. How, when these are done via power structures, you feel this is the only way in which you can fight back. And this call-out culture, the fact that you can go back home that very night and call out that sheriff for doing something bad is an empowering thing for that individual. Second, we told you why it's an important source of solace. The fact that you can do something about it makes you feel more empowered and it helps you sleep better at night. And the third, the fact that we give you argumentation regarding chain reactions, where seeing one person, other people speak up, and that is purely because of this call-out culture. We don't see a response to that, so we don't know how they win this argument. But before I move on to the last clash, sure.
If more people under your side are rejected from the overall liberal movement, then all of your benefits are completely taken down, because there are less of these people who will believe into this rhetoric.
I'm sorry, I just proved to you why these people aren't excluded. Because these people have defenders. So there are conservative people in society that will defend such acts from being existent. So in the comment section, there will be people from both ends. I don't know why it's just from a singular end. Lastly, our entire argument of empathy from my second speaker, absolutely unrebutted. How these sort of hateful comments and visceral images need to exist to grab people's attention and give people a realistic assessment of the feeling that you feel when these things are done for you. Now, lastly, and this I'll spend the least time on because the premise is already broken, but let's talk to you about two things that they said. First, that it's unnecessary, disproportionate to the attackers, right? That was the second speaker argument. The easy way to rebut this is this, that if it's disproportionate, people will call out saying that it's disproportionate. That's the beauty of social media. All sorts of ideas exist there. But secondly, we think you cannot judge what is proportionate and what is disproportionate given that offense can be taken in different variations. Some things can hurt people in different variations. They'll treat it in the importance that they feel like it. Secondly, they say that they'll get a larger platform. Note, that doesn't matter. You know why? Because the way in which they get the platform is by seeing that people are hating on such toxic ideologies, so you'll be less receptive towards it. We gave you an entire notion of deterrence, ladies and gentlemen, where we essentially told you why this makes people from power structures fear what they do. Because they know there'll be a video of them posted on Facebook and someone writing hurtful comments about it, and how that tarnishes their reputation. That makes them second guess. In that simple comparative, we are the only one that gives you a mechanism. They just give you some ideas that don't essentially lead to the end. Very proud to oppose.
Okay, thank you. I would like to invite the reverse speaker of the opposition to deliver their speech.
They've got a very skewed perception of call-out culture. The importance of shame and hateful comments were heavily characterized by the three speakers of Team Opposition. How did we do so? First, we told you how this deters people from doing this because it brings shame to those actions in the very first place. That says that this action is just so terrible that this cannot have a place in our society. And that deters people because that tarnishes their reputation. Secondly, call-out culture obliges others to, oppose such oppression because it says that this action is just so terrible that you cannot just you just cannot go away without batting an eye, which says that you have an obligation to oppose these actions to begin with. That's the exact reason why it gets shared so many, on such a mass scale, because everyone feels an obligation to contribute to it. Third, the viscerality that is attached to it, the fact that every single time these actions are put into focus, they have a visceral image that's attached to it, and it makes those actions seem extremely abhorrent. Their conception of call-out culture has been twofold. First, that it only focuses on trivial details. I don't see how that's problematic, because we've already told you why. For some people, those trivial details are just so oppressive to themselves that they need to bring them into focus. But secondly, I don't see how trivial details like blackface or the color of your pens, that the second speaker arguments necessarily have everyone hate these things to begin with. How that brings these sorts of issues to focus with such massive level of shaming, I don't know how that occurs. In the vast majority of cases, it's on extremely important issues like police brutality, like assaults that happen in certain communities that comprise of certain minorities. They never tackled us on all of that. They took the most convenient case in which certain trivial details are only being covered by that. But secondly, they told you why you only shame the race that these oppressors come from. We told you that's not the case. Liberal people have a tendency to not blame the race you come from or the ethnicity you come from. They rather shame the action and portray it to be grotesque in and of itself. The unrefuted argumentations from that side. One, the entire idea about self-defense. Every single time a minority is assaulted and you share these stories on a wide scale, you feel that you're not alone, that you're not helpless, and the society will bat an eye to all of this. But second is that other people also share their own stories and therefore have a voice. It's a chain reaction in which every single people get to have a voice, because one person shares their stories and you all start shaming that action, you all start sharing those stories and therefore give voice to them. Secondly, the way in which state-sponsored oppression comes to an end. The state covers a lot of these forms of oppression by using the media, saying that these are justified forms of oppression because we're trying to protect you, because these are minorities that deserve to be oppressed. The way in which this is opposed is when people put shame into those actions, hate those actions, and say that this cannot have a place in our society. They tell you that this is not an issue in our debate, because opposition to the state cannot be a part of call-out culture. Call-out culture also puts into question certain groups, and the state can surely be a part of that. But the important argumentation from that side was that people oppose these progressive values, because notice that they have dropped arguments as they went down the bench. They firstly talked about people should talk about this privately, then when we refuted them, no more response. They told you about how it derails the conversation. When we refuted that, they dropped that as well. So the last argumentation was about people opposing these progressive values. We told you why centrists would rather support liberal values, because when they see that these minority struggles are real and these actions are truly shameful, they feel that those liberals' concerns are legitimate. Secondly, racists won't support your progressive values either ways. I don't see how you bring them into the side of liberals every time you focus on their actions in your widespread news media. But thirdly, even if it's true, at least we have safety for these minorities because they are not assaulted anymore. You deter those crimes, you bring them to public scrutiny, and that is exactly what we stand for. Very proud to oppose.
that Team Bangladesh actually takes the full burden in this way. They aren't actually protecting all of call-out culture. They're only protecting instances where people are hugely discriminated against, people are done huge misactions to, and they are hugely harmed. These are things that people carry out in either side of the house. When people are harmed to a very large extent, they can talk about those things, and they will get to the public eye because they're immense misactions. I think that they are protecting the instances where people, for example, answer to different jokes and memes because of call-out culture, things that they also need to protect because people are going to shame the people who are doing these things. They need to react to every misaction, react to everything that is done that might perceivably harm the groups that we are talking about in this debate. They only protect the examples that are beneficial for them and don't actually engage with the full burden. This is the reason why Team Bangladesh should lose this debate. Two things I want to clarify in this reply. Firstly, I want to talk about what do these groups actually care about and what are the most important things for them. Secondly, how can they best reach the things that are most important to them, and which side is best at helping these minority groups. Talking about the first thing, what do these groups actually care about? We told you that these groups, the main motivation is some kind of general ideas. The biggest principles that these groups have and the big things that are going to carry the most beneficial impact for them. We put it in the most general sense. How police brutality, for example, is probably more important to the black community in the United States than blackface. The reason for that being is that one causes people to die, while the other is a very bad thing, it doesn't have such huge impact on this community. But moreover, notice that the police brutality point is probably something that more people in that society are going to agree with. They are more likely to agree with the fact that every person deserves some level of justice in that country, deserves an equal level of justice. Blackface, for example, is a very abstract idea for many of these people that they can never truly understand. This means that for those people in the United States, for example, these, for example, police brutality is really more important, something they more want to achieve than these subtle changes that they are protecting on their call-out culture. Thus, we don't think that their call-out culture characterization is actually going to improve the most important things for those groups, and thus they are getting the most impact. But now we go to how can we actually help these minority groups look better. Opposition gives you analysis where you need a face behind the things that someone is doing. This is actually not what they need to protect on this side of the house. They needed to protect a characterization where they say that this person is horrible, this person is disgusting, this person is a racist, a sexist, and shouldn't be a part of our society because they are so horrible and should be shamed to such a great extent. Under this characterization, which exists with call-out culture, all the people who, to some extent, agree with the person who made some kind of comment are forced to agree with the thing because the minority group seems so radical. They agree with the person who made the comment that we in this room might say is wrong, but those people believe that the other side is so much more radical that I can never agree with the things that they are saying. The supporters of that minority are always going to agree with that minority, which is exactly where the polarization that we told you about from our first speech onwards is going to be created. These groups can lobby for less positive changes because a vast majority of the society is so much against them that no middle ground can ever be reached, that there is little average people in the society who can vouch for some kind of change for these people. But furthermore, the fact that they are seen as radical also diverts attention from the things that are most important for those people. They react the same to everything and they use up the social capital that they have for things that might not be the most important for them, meaning that black community can never fight against police brutality because they are fighting so much against blackface. But finally, we think that all the benefits that opposition outlines can exist with proposition. You can still create context by saying that I was on a bus, but you don't need to publicly shame in person. You can still talk about the same systemic issues without saying that one person is the one that caused all of these things and they should always be shamed and they have massive outrage because to this person. You can still give the same power to these people and allow them to talk about the things that have happened to them. All of their positive impacts come under our side because call-out culture is necessary and they never proved why call-out culture was necessary. We are happy to stand for a while without public shaming and huge outrage because it's better for these minorities. I beg you to propose. Thank you.